We've all seen a few top 10 board game lists, and don't get me wrong, they're great. But what if there was someone out there, someone brave enough to collect every board game YouTuber's #1 board game of all time and put it into one easy to digest video? Well, luckily for you, that day has come. I'm Orski, a board game YouTuber, and I've done exactly that. If you're intrigued about any of the games on this list, and I've already made a video about it, I'll put a card in the video and I'll have a link to that video in the description. Additionally, I'll have a link to every one of these YouTube channels and the video I referenced for this video. And if you like this video, consider subscribing to the channel. Let's do this.
And now, the #1 is TI4. We're playing as this space civilization, try to control the galaxy, amassing fleets of dreadnoughts, cruisers, and these things called war suns, which are like Death Stars, and then you're voting on politics that can change the rules of the game. TI4 just continues to stick in my head because of the epic scale with a clean command token mechanic. But every turn is just one single action, that's it. You can get more technology, pursue politics, or just make some crazy fun aggressive move to swoop into your friend's territory and take their planets. You can't win by doing purely politics, and you can't win by purely just out-efficiencying your opponent. You gotta do both. And that's what makes the skill curve of TI4 so entertaining, where you're forced to tackle the game at all these different deep levels, which is why I always think this space opera is worth the time investment.
My #1 is Gloomhaven. It was just like a really fun dungeon crawler that I was really into. There are different points throughout playing Gloomhaven that it made me realize, it started making me feel like D&D and like we were building a story. But you're going through a pre-written story where you have different choices and different arcs, but you're still playing through what's already determined. The way it forces you to play through different types of classes in ways that you are not comfortable, and then when you finally get it and learn how it makes sense, I feel like it makes you evolve as a player, that not many games can do that can make you smarter and quicker and better and think different ways for playing. Thank you, Gloomhaven. You've literally made me a better player in so many ways.
And my favorite game of all time is Forbidden Stars. I will say that to me it is one of the best examples of asymmetric gameplay in the industry. It's so good. I think one of the best elements of it is not only the combination of the combat, but also order placement. It's just, it is a vicious game. It is so mean. It is so beautiful. I love Forbidden Stars so much. It's the #1 game of all time.
My number one, it's Terraforming Mars. But Terraforming Mars, at the end of the day, the thing that does it for me is the drafting gives me those moments of just competitiveness as I look at my hand of cards, as I try to think through what I'm going to play into my tableau. You're building an engine. The whole game is about building that engine. You are terraforming Mars. You're trying to be mindful of the different criteria that go towards terraforming Mars, and you're working your way towards them while building up your own tableau. But the overall package of Terraforming Mars plus Prelude plus maybe some other expansions is the best gaming experience I consistently have again and again and again.
Last but not least is going to be Terraforming Mars. And everyone knows that this is my #1 game of all time. There's no questioning it. But it's rightfully here. Every time I went over that list, the one spot that never changed was Terraforming Mars.
Really? Not even a question about
Not
it?
Not even a question. I love this game. It's got my favorite mechanic ever, drafting. The engine building, the resource management, even the slight area control here out on the board. It encompasses it all. Every game turns out different. Every game I try a new strategy.
Yeah.
And I love this game. Oh, ask me any day of the week if I want to play Terraforming Mars, and if I have the time, I will say yes.
My #1, no change.
Consistent.
No change.
On the dime.
Whatsoever.
Blood Rage.
Blood Rage. People think that this is just an area control game, and I would disagree with them. This is a drafting game that has area control in it.
I'd agree.
You can win or lose the game in the draft. You could also give somebody else the game in the draft.
Yeah. The weight of that escalating card draft too feels so beautiful as you're playing, as you're passing around the table. Every time you get a new hand, there's cards in there that you desperately want to keep.
I like also the fact that by the time that your game is over, you all have widely asymmetric factions.
My #1 game of all time, right now, is going to be Bus by Splotter. This game will melt your brain, and it'll do so by offering up about 5 core actions and options you're taking, 1 core strategic principle, and a set of rules that is literally on a little brochure or a pamphlet that you're folding out. It is beautiful. It It is a route building game. You're doing your very best to bring certain meeples to certain locations during certain times of the day. They want to go from their house to work, from work to the bar, from the bar to their house. And you'll be doing so by programming bus routes across the city that allow you to pick up, drop off, and control certain segments of this population. But you also have to decide when your buses go. You have to decide when you build routes. You have to decide how many people you're going to be able to move. Sometimes stealing your workers or meeples, sometimes building routes in areas that you would have liked to go, and sometimes you completely forget that you had to hit room in order to take off.
So number one on my list is, of course, keeping its number one spot. It's been there for quite some time for me, and that is, of course, Agricola, which is my favorite Uwe Rosenberg game, of course. This is worker placement done in my opinion, the best way, the most satisfying way. I have this love of games with these complex card systems to explore, and I think a lot of that goes back to our love of Magic and stuff like that. Games with cards where you have private information that the other players can't see, and you can plan, but there's other information to look at on the board, and there's sort of conflicting priorities. And what Agricola does in a way that I haven't felt that level of tension and the kind of that sort of like alchemy, that synergy of mechanisms, in the way that you're at odds with the strategy you've made, having to come to terms with, I can no longer play this card that I told myself at the start of the game that I had to play because there's clearly a better move, but you're constantly having to reshuffle your priorities and reanalyze the game state because the importance of everything changes. Yeah. Because the more I've played it, it's reminded me that it truly is my favorite game, and it's probably going to stay that way for a while. And I'm just going to keep buying more of the expansion card decks to just see more cards because, again, that's what gives the game life and that longevity.
My number one, yeah, of course, has to be Just One.
Just one at number one.
Just one at number one. This game, it is a party game. Absolutely. Again, like I said, party games are one of my favorites and has been an absolute staple for me. And it's my number one. I enjoy it so much, and I can't say enough good things.
So number one game is, of course, you probably know what it is, A Feast for Odin. It was number 2 last year. It's everything I love about games, not only board games, even video games. You just have this sandbox area, board, whatever, that you can take multiple routes to victory, multiple things you can do, multiple ways you can approach the game. I can play this game and I can decide I'm going to do a whole bunch of pillaging and a whole bunch of, going out and getting a bunch of sheep or whatever. I can have a completely different strategy compared to the last time I played. I can get no island boards, or the next game I can get a whole bunch. You've had a game where you get a bunch of island boards. I have one where I get 0 or 1, and our scores are not far apart. Yeah. We're both in contention. And I just love getting to the table and just figuring out how am I going to approach it this time, and is it going to work out for me, and how am I going to adapt to where my opponents are putting their Vikings and blocking spots for me. It's a great game. I love it.
A Feast for Odin's my number one. It's been my number one. It is. Unless Kingopolis gets up there, it's going to stay number one. Yeah. This is an Uwe Rosenberg worker placement game set in the world of Vikings, where you're doing a bunch of Viking stuff. So this game I could play forever and try different things to just eke out as many points as possible. There's 1,000,001 paths. And I think the fact that you can continually discover this game every single time you play it makes it infinitely playable. It's the best game ever made, Feast for Odin. Thank you, Uwe. Thank you. My number one, won't be surprised if you've watched our channel for a while, it's my number one for a long time, and it is Viticulture. Viticulture is a game where you're running a vineyard, everyone is running their own vineyard, and you are getting different vines that will have different kinds of grapes. You are then harvesting those grapes, you are squishing those grapes into juice, and you are turning that juice into wine, and you are trying to fulfill wine orders. Yep. I just love it. Again, it's been my favorite game since the moment I saw it, from the moment I played it, and it still is. I really, really, really enjoy it. I think Viticulture is absolutely outstanding. It's my favorite game. Boom.
So my favorite game, at least in this last year, I've loved playing this, is Root. Root is adorable to begin with. You are playing as little woodland creatures. Each woodland creature has a different way of winning the game. So it's not just a space domination game that you would see in Risk, in games like Risk, kind of like Small World that I was talking about before. And you have to keep in mind what every other group is trying to do. It's like ultimate politics within a forest setting, and it's just really cute.
So my last pick is going to be Root, obviously.
Of course.
It's my favorite game of all time. Asymmetric war game with different woodland factions. This has some of the best artwork out there. Cal Farron is a genius. Cole Worley, the designer, is a genius. The production is genius. This is my favorite game of all time. I love it.
My number one favorite game is unchanged from last year, and that is Root. Root is a twist on coin games where everyone is playing an asymmetrical faction, and they are ripping around the woodland trying to achieve their objectives. Root is incredible, and I don't know if it's ever going to come out of that number one spot because I absolutely love every time I've played it. I think I've probably played at least 100 games of Root in 2022.
Yeah. My number one game of all time, that is Villainous, okay? Villainous is a game that I love for many reasons. And number one, there's a huge nostalgia factor for me. I love Disney, and I particularly love Disney villains. Like, I love villains. Every villain feels like that villain to me. I just love it. I love Villainous.
Number one could only be one thing, and that is Nemesis. The best way I can describe it is the movie Alien in board game form. It hits the closest to what you expect from that movie. It covers the tension and the worry of having traitors in your midst and not knowing who to trust. It's such an interesting game. I absolutely love playing this one. Everyone has their own objective. They're going around a ship, but you can't worry about everyone else because you're also being chased by aliens. It creates the best stories, it creates the best moments, and at the end of the day, that's what we're all trying to create when we play these board games.
The best game of all time ever is
Nemesis. Essentially, you already talked about Nemesis. Yep. Nemesis, this is horror survival space in the game where you're trying to essentially survive. Not win, but you won't do either of those, so don't worry. And if you've seen Aliens, the movie, the first or the second one, you know what this is all about. Betrayal, there's a lot of interaction, it's about aliens chasing you, and it's definitely not a game for everybody. It's a very punishing game where you can technically die on your first turn.
Yeah.
If you're not careful.
Yeah. Our record, I think, is 15 minutes. Mine is Wonderland's War. And why it is number one? It is because there's everything I like about board games. There's drafting, which I love. Push your luck, which is just always thrilling and exciting, pulling out chips from your bag.
I also like a deck building, pool building.
Colorful. It's area control, which means tons of interactions and emotions. There's also this upgrading system where you have your Alice in Wonderland's character, Alice herself maybe, and you constantly upgrade her and get better. There's like synergies between the actions and dice, and it's so satisfying all around. It's interesting. It's something that I show to people and they immediately want to play it, and when they play it, they immediately want to play it again. Really, really good design. My favorite game of all time.
So one that we never covered on the channel, surprisingly, and it's my number one of all time. This is Brass, Lancashire. Essentially what you are different industrialists during the 1800s. You are going to be building out canals during the first half of the game to try to connect to different cities. At the halfway point of the game, all the canals are going to be stripped off because now there's new technology for how you're going to ship goods. And so now you're going to start to build railways to try to do the same exact thing in the second half of the game. It's very, very interesting what you're doing here. There's a hand management aspect where the cards have kind of multi-use. You can build in different industries, or you can build directly into certain cities that you're maybe cut off from. Yeah, it's just a game that I constantly want to come back to because there's just so much going on in it.
All right, and finally, my number one game of all time. It's called Lisboa. If you're not familiar with the game, you have a deck of cards. You have a hand of cards. You on your turn, you play a card, and you just do a bunch of stuff.
You decide where you want to play it, and then perform actions accordingly.
Yes, that is the most simple. There's two halves to the game, and then at the end of the game, whoever has most points wins. That's how you play Lisboa.
That's it.
It's the most simple version of it.
It can go pretty quickly.
Oh yeah.
You play a card, you take the actions, and you move on. There's a point in the game where the deck of cards gets kind of changed out, and then you get kind of the same actions but just a little bit sweeter, and so the timing of the game nice. Gets a little bit nerve-wracking. Sometimes you're like, man, I think I can do a little bit more, and then a stack runs out and you're like, the game ends. And so I always feel like I'm one or two turns away, and I think for me that's a sign of a really, really good design. You don't want to feel like, oh, I've done everything and now I'm just waiting for this clock to run out.
This is a game that we've talked about so much in the past, and so we'll leave it at that. This is my number one and
my number 3 of all time. That is Lisboa.
Rising Sun is number one, but here are the coolest notes of why I like it. Negotiation has the follow mechanic, which is always interesting, keeps everybody engaged. You can have formal alliances that you can then break. You're also going to be fighting with a blind bidding where there's so much tension of revealing what you bid. You know, Catan was my gateway game, and it scratches a lot of the same itches in a certain way of that negotiation, a lot of talk around the table, a lot of cutthroat decision making. Everything, every aspect of this game is fun. The politics that it creates around the table, the conversation that it creates around the table, and how you have to fight tooth and nail to really come out on top. That's my number one game of all time, Rising Sun. I love it to death.
My number one game is no surprise to anyone who has known me for a while. It's Wingspan. Of course it is. Wingspan is a truly beautiful game with amazing components and great artwork. For me, this game is nearly perfect. The components and art are stunning, the theme is amazing, the gameplay is very fluid and the rules aren't too hard to grasp. This is a truly excellent board game and deserves to be at the top spot on my list.
But my number one game, of course, is Mage Knight. I've always said it's laughable that we are in this day and age, and yet I can't find a game that's better than that. It is one of the best card games, if not the best card game, right, to me. When you have that turn, when you figure out everything, and you got all these little things lined up, and you're like, how am I going to defeat them? How am I going to finish this off? And you are trying to figure out every choice of your card. Like, am I going to be able to deal with this? Oh, I figured that out. That spell works. I figured this out. Okay. If I could get past here. And it's like you're watching all these experiences happen. And when you finish it, it's like, dog it, that was great. Woo! When I play it, I'm still blown away.
Yeah.
I'm still blown away.
But yeah, Kanban is my number one. It's my favorite Lacerda, but it's also my favorite just game. I don't know, just Kanban is something that I just want to keep playing, which is hard because it's a very long and very heavy game. The way all the different parts of the factory come together, the way you can do that timing with Sandra and the other players. And I've had so many just memorable times where I'm like, I think I'm going to go in this space. And then someone else later is like, Emily, are you serious?
Well,
like,
that's every
like,
action.
Yep. Because I
time.
purposely did it so that way you're gonna move here and then he's gonna move there and then like you're trying to game everything together all at once and trying to really control the situation, not just for yourself but for everyone at the table. Oh, your brain is burned after a full game of Kanban.
My number one is Orleans.
Yep.
Orleans was my number one back in the day when we originally did our top 10 of all time, and it still is. Kind of has a special place in my heart in that it is a pretty good medium weight Euro, right? It's very medium weight. It's definitely not light. But it was just amazing to me that, oh my gosh, I can play Orleans with my family.
Yeah.
And they did really well. And it's such a good game.
My number one is Marvel Champions.
Yes.
This is by far the most fun that I have had playing a game ever. I have always loved superheroes and games that make you feel like superheroes. You're playing against a different boss every time, or even a big scenario that covers multiple bosses, or each one is effectively a puzzle. They have their strengths, they have their weaknesses, and you have to figure out how to beat that puzzle, how to beat this boss. You have to deal with all of these threats that are accumulating as you're playing the game, and just the heroes feel so thematic. Every one of their decks comes with unique cards that only they get. It may be the best superhero game that I've ever played.
And number one is Pandemic. This is a cooperative game about saving the world from 4 deadly diseases. So you've got a map of the world in the middle, and there are diseases that are spread across the board, and you are trying to move around and treat them, because if the world gets overrun by them, you're going to lose the game. It's such a cinematic idea, and because that theme does come through, it's not this amazing thematic reproduction or simulation, but it does have these touches that really feel like the disease is spreading and you do constantly feel under pressure to get it all done in time. The perfect board game that I would recommend to everyone if they were trying to get into the hobby, and it's one that can still fascinate me even after years of playing it.
Nato, what is your favorite game of all time?
Go with Android Netrunner. It just has all the best parts of Magic the Gathering, poker, and a whole bunch of innovative new mechanics that still feel fresh. And there's so many interactions. It's just an endlessly fascinating game. And ultimately, just based on sheer play time, the amount of games I have played of it, I figure it has to be my number one.
And as for me,
Nate, as for me. Android Netrunner
Great minds think alike.
Yes. Android Netrunner
Hey, what
takes
are you saying?
my number one spot as well. There's all the things Nate mentioned, along with the thing I might add on is asymmetrical play. I love that you can, being either the corp or the runner, the winning conditions change, of course, according to which faction. And I love the tension that play. It just hangs in the air in between turns when you're waiting for your opponent to complete their turn, and you know the information that can really damage you and plays that can really damage you, and you are just praying they do not do those things. So I just love it about the game. Great game. Amazing game.
And my favorite game of all time is Kemet. I love Kemet. The combat system is the best of any game I've played. The miniatures have massive appeal for me. And who doesn't want to grab the scorpion and just get it on your team and sting everybody? There's so many cool techs that you can pursue. The components, the gameplay, the theme, all of it gets me super jazzed. And every game comes down to the wire, and players are forced to work together to stop the apparent board leader. And all in all, to date, this is hands down the best game I've ever played.
My number one is Dwellings of Eldervale. It was number one last year, and it's still number one this year. But look, this is a game that I just adore. I love the way that the worker placement works, how you have different workers. I love the slight asymmetric play. I don't know what I missed there.
It's only unemployed people watch this.
Oh, okay. There you go.
Jeez. My goodness. 51st State is my number one game still. Mm-hmm. It is a wonderful game. It's a post-apocalyptic game. Mm-hmm. It's a cards with powers game that I love. You get to embody a faction of marauders or crazy scientists in the future where the world has been spoiled and you want to get together and build up a thing and go out and claim new territory or rebuild perhaps. Or maybe, invest in technology and play cards and, build up your tableau. Tableau is the word of the day here. I really enjoy this game. This is a wonderful, wonderful game.
My number one, same as number one last year, is Arc Nova. I like big, heavy Euros sometimes, and I like ones like this. This has a hodgepodge of mechanisms, but I like them all. I think they're all fun. When they were explaining it, I remember the first time going, I like that. I like that. Each thing just gets better. And I like teaching it the same way. Like, you can also upgrade your cards, and then people get excited. It's a great, great game. Arc Nova.
And my number one is Through the Ages, A New Story of Civilization. This is an epic civilization building game where you're going to span the ages from antiquity all the way to modern times. It's got everything that you would expect from a civilization game. You have wars, you have exploration, you have technologies, governments, leaders. You're building all sorts of buildings. You have workers. You're dealing with your citizens' happiness, managing food and resources, building great wonders and colonizing distant lands. There's so much going on, and it is so thinky because you are balancing these different resources. It's like you're spinning plates. No other civilization game that I've played comes close to capturing the feeling that I get when playing this one. And that's why it is my number one favorite board game of all time. That's Through the Ages, A New Story of Civilization.
Number 1, Smash Up. My all-time favourite game ever is Smash Up. Smash Up calls itself a shuffle building game because each player takes 2 themed decks of 20 cards, stuff like zombies, ninjas or mythic horses, and shuffles them together to create one deck. The goal is simply to play minions onto bases, each minion having a strength that contributes to a score needed to break a base and remove it from play. The player with the most value there when the base breaks scores the big pot of victory points, first to 15 wins, and it is that simple. But the fun is experimenting with a game that never quite feels the same twice, and somewhere in those 40 cards will always be 1 or 2 that can do something clever when combined, and that is my catnip.
Number 1, Blood on the Clock Tower. Of course it is. I chose this Blood on the Clock Tower because it is the ultimate social deduction game. What's so good about this game is how everyone, even the least important characters, can have a huge impact on the game. Simply put, is beautifully crafted. I have never played a game of Blood on the Clock Tower that wasn't genuinely thrilling. Complex, frustrating, joyous, and tense, Blood on the Clock Tower will always promise fun.
Number 1 is Cosmic Encounter. The best game. The best of all the games. A really weird, lumpy, chaotic, hot mess of aliens clobbering each other in space. It's a little like Risk in space. You fight each other with numbers. If you have the biggest number, you move into someone else's territory. But every single player is a different alien. And every alien has a superpower which breaks the rules of the game so wildly and so significantly that in isolation it would be wildly unfair. But when everyone is OP, that creates this insane cocktail of advantages, weaknesses, alliances, betrayals, powers and cards pinging off each other while everyone role plays their aliens. Incredibly social, incredibly rewarding the more you come to understand the way rules can be bent in your favor. My favorite thing to do is play Cosmic Encounter with some close friends. There are few better ways to spend your time.
Okay, the moment has come. My number 1 game of all time, it's Dune Imperium. Specifically with the Rise of Ix expansion, which makes the game 10 times better. It's a deck-building worker placement game set in the Dune universe. The first player to get the 10 victory points wins the game, and every victory point you get just feels so impactful, so important. You see your opponents climbing up that track, and you know that you have to get something done if you want to catch up. There's a lot of short-term strategy where you have to think about the best way to play out your one turn, but also there's long-term planning where you're building out your deck to score you as many points as possible. There are so many different ways to win. You can go for a deck-building strategy. You can go for a combat strategy. You can just draw a million of these mystery cards, also known as intrigue cards, that give you special benefits. I have played this game so many times, and I'm still excited to just boot up a game and play. There's so much replayability, and every game just feels so unique. The Rise of Ix expansion adds this technology track that can upgrade your engine in a bunch of different ways. There's a new shipping track. Everything they added in that expansion is gold. They recently added a new expansion called Immortality as well. I'm a little bit up on the fence for it. I think this one's a little bit more optional. It just adds a ton new cards and a new track that adds a ton of variability to the game, but I don't know if it makes it a lot better necessarily. I think it's good if you've played a lot of Rise of Ix and you want to add some excitement into the game again. But otherwise, I think Dune Imperium plus Rise of Ix is the real sweet spot for me, and I can't recommend it enough. If you liked the video, consider subscribing to the channel, and I hope you have a wonderful day.